Next on our agenda is, I believe, what is described as the final synthesis and discussion section. And so this is the point where we're going to ask for feedback from you all. I believe it is the staff here have been collecting particular points throughout the meeting, and are going to list them up there. And so we're going to do this as a group. We're going to ask for feedback both from people here in the audience. Now we have two groups that are online. There are people who have signed in through Zoom, and so if you have signed in and you're online through Zoom, then I think we will be able to get your feedback as well. Then for those of you who are in the general audience that are listening in, unfortunately we don't have a good way to get your information. We do encourage you, please do listen into the conversation. Obviously it's going to be a room conversation, so we might not hear everything, but we're going to endeavor to summarize for everyone what comes out of that conversation. I'll just stop for a second. Okay, a couple things. One is that logistics. So at 3:30, I have to go to the airport so I don't miss my plane. And so I'm not sure how long I'll be part of this conversation. I think I have colleagues who intrepid partners who are willing to assist with the group conversation, who will be helping as well. But I think I'm sure I speak for everybody when I really appreciate Julie and Liz and Claire and Emily and the real Matt, who's in the back and running the show. All of you all really do a fantastic job and are really the ones who make this work so well. So if you could just take a moment and thank them for all of that. Extremely appreciated. So from here, and we did just in a time rehearsal, so people correct me if I'm getting it wrong. But this is a long list of topics here or points. I think that we would like feedback from you all. We're going to give you all just a couple minutes to think this through, to digest this, because there's a lot on here. I think that we would welcome comments of adjustment of verbiage, if you think there's a way to put it that gets better. If there are additional topics potentially to add, that'd be okay, but I think that we don't, we're trying to, get feedback from our side to, kind of summarize from this meeting eventually what are the most important takeaways, including from you all. And so if there are additional topics that are really important, we'd hear from those as well. And then, and then we'll go from there. I think that we'll give people a couple minutes to think about it, and then it's open mic for people who want to have comments on this. We look forward to hearing them. So. Teresa, I think you might. Oh.
Dr. Romer can go first.
We'll get to them both. Sure.
Thank you, and sorry I have to leave right after.
Oh,
this.
No, please.
So I'm glad you said open mic, not karaoke. And so a couple of things that I'd like to add, and they were discussed, et cetera, as well, but I think they're important to add to the list a little bit more formally. To emphasize, in terms of social and behavioral sciences, not just a task force, but leading to emphasis on the science of behavior in outbreaks. So there is a lot of work that requires on-the-ground management, and frankly, especially at the local level, we have fewer gaps there. In fact, they were covering for so public health officials at the local and even state level, depending on the state, not dissing Florida, but there was pretty effective action from state officials. But we have these scientific gaps, and we don't focus on that. And so, so investment in that, but also making sure it's not an afterthought. Appropriations, we had approximately 150 million appropriated in 2020 for preventing pandemic despondence. And nothing on vaccine acceptance or behavior around vaccination. So both appropriations, but also building the science. Second thing is we do not have neither the infrastructure nor the vocabulary. And when you talk to federal officials, they just don't know what you're talking about when you're talking about public health trials. Trials of masking effectiveness. we don't have a place to actually large trials. There are smaller things that CDC sometimes funds. There's evidence going back. They were underpowered studies, etc. So that's the other specific thing. So two things: investments and appropriations for pandemic science early on. The second thing is public health trial infrastructure.
Appreciate this comment. So Julie, somebody's typing down these suggestions. Okay, great.
So I'm going to add something, and you know, it sort of impacts on a number of the bullets here, and also relates to a variety of similar comments throughout today and yesterday. There was a lot of discussion and mention of, well, we need to establish X, we need manufacturing, or we need certain infrastructure, which I think makes sense, but I think a key part of that equation that's missing is, how do you sustain it? You know, we've seen, for example, the US government established facilities that were supposed to be warm-based to turnkey operation, to respond to pandemics and related crises, and they all failed. They all failed. And so really the question is, you know, and I forget who mentioned this, I think it was yesterday, you know, you can build a factory, a vaccine factory in country X or country Y, but it's not just the four walls and the stuff inside, it's the people, it's the training, it's the quality, and the sustainment. You know, you make one lot of vaccine and then you turn it off for a year, well, that's not gonna work. So I think somehow we have to work that into this. You know, on the one hand, you know, there's always a desire to have stuff, to have new stuff, and to be able to respond. And you know, in a certain sense, that's correct, but the back end has to be addressed as well.
I'd like to follow up on Dr. Omar's comments relative to session 3 on social behavioral sciences. I think this is new to a lot of people, and we're struggling with how to incorporate and do this well. So a couple points I took away from that as moderator were, we need to engage and listen to communities by going to where they are and adjusting to their uniqueness. And secondly, that there's a broad range of robust research on health communication and changing health behaviors that need to be included in the body of evidence for combating COVID.
Chris Braden, CDC and forum member. I had a couple of things I wanted to say, and I think a previous speaker alluded to this, but it has to do you know, with mitigation interventions apart from medical countermeasures and the research that needs to be done in that space. And I have seen a bit of a competition actually between medical countermeasures research and the funding and functions that are required for a response. And so we need to fold all of these priorities together to be able to decide what is the, you know, what our funding priorities are, so that they're not in competition, because we see that sometimes at CDC. I would also say that what was brought up at one point, but I think also needs to be elevated in the conversation, is data monetization. We talked about a little bit about the data that comes from electronic medical records, for instance, and there are a number of vendors and trying to bring that together. But then you know, the challenge is even multiplied when you look at public health data systems in the different states and in the different counties and so forth. There's a lot that we need that data to determine, not only for research, but our, you know, other aspects of the response that we really need to invest in and become more more able to share and analyze that data in an integrated way. And in a similar sense, there needs to be more in the international collaboration. I think certainly we can share what we find in our research in an international way, but what if we could combine our data in international collaborations? I think is also something that we should really look forward to be able to do, to get, you know, those, you know, really large databases to find, you know, to be much faster in what we can do to come up with the types of information that is going to guide our decisions. I would like to say also that there's some talk that we've had about distributed responsibility. There's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of expectations in government. There's a lot of expectations in certain agencies within government. But I think that the responsibility is distributed, really. And some of that responsibility has to do with our leadership and our public. And I think the public needs to understand that. They're not just receiving vessels. They need to be engaged. They need to be also responsible. And that includes public leaders. And then, I think that's enough for now. But those are the things I wanted to say.
Thank you. If I may comment, if we're getting into specifics on data gathering and sharing, I think within local and state public health, there is a wide variety, I'm sure you know, of capacity to gather and share data effectively. But between public health and healthcare system, I think that sharing is, to my mind, the biggest lift and uniformly not anywhere near where we need it to be. And so that I think people, think, well, it's just within public health, the data, it's not just there. It is with providers and with healthcare systems. So thank you.
So if I could just ask then to our public health professionals. Yeah, I know Matt needs to head out, but not to put you back on the spot, Chris, but so that's a critical issue. And the example of the dichotomy between the recovery trial enabled by the NHS in the UK compared to the system here, that's in the context of treatment. And you're talking about in the context of surveillance and et cetera. What are the specific things that can be implemented to better enable data sharing, for example? And that's a very difficult question to answer in a short period of time. But I think that's what we want to set the stage for in terms of so that we're not having this exact same conversation 2 years from now. If you want to take a minute and go back to the microphone, and then we'll go. But how do we achieve that? Or what can we do to achieve that notional aspiration?
Oh, excuse me. So I would say that there's two things that are very specific that I think would be helpful in a very real way, and that is. We can develop science standards in a number of ways, but the science standards around data is something that we really need to work on. So data standards would be one of them, but also data architecture. We now have the capacity in some of our data architecture technology, especially dealing with the cloud, to really bring this information together in a way that we've never had before. Because traditionally we've had standalone on-premise systems, right? But now we don't need to depend upon those. So there is the ability to bring data together technically that we haven't had before, but we need to be able to use them. And so the agreements, there you get into policy about how you bring the agreements together for data sharing to be able to then layer data in a shared way.
Thanks very much. Dr. Rosell?
Well, first, I would like to thank the conveners. This has been a monumental task, and all the talks were good. And now, I've been to these meetings before, not just here, but to all parts of government agencies and parts of the private sector. And what do I know? There was nothing really too new here. There were some explanations and a little more emphasis on public perception and anti-vaccine, but I've been to those meetings too. So it's not new. Everything on the screen is exactly fine. I have no trouble with that. And I still think the purpose is to spotlight the problems because there's no solutions here. You spotlight the problem and somebody's going to have to come up with an answer of how do you do it. Implementation science is not only the science, but it's also doing something, which is really hard. So I think that's worth it. And we know we are in Washington. And in Washington, what's important are the shiny objects. There's no sustainability. 2 years is about the maximum sustainability I've seen with most things, because people change, well, for whatever reason. So sustainability is going to be really, really difficult, because there'll be a new shiny object, and there'll be a new war, and there'll be a new this or that. And it won't be the money. In the government, it's never the money. It's political will. And I don't know how you fix that. Again, be nice to have it there. I think it's important. There's one thing that's not on here, which is public health acceptance of violence. Intimidate, you heard it from one of the speakers and from somebody in the audience, and at least our health person in Ohio. They basically ran them out of town, threatening them, their families, that sort of thing. And the public health sector seems to accept it. And it's not adequate, because you lose people. And even the people who are there, it's a chill in the air. And again, people in public health, this is not a SWAT team. They shouldn't have to tolerate that. So I think that's an important concept, that people have to have some decorum, even if they disagree. Let's see. Reporting data. I love data. And I know the foibles of data, so you have to be careful. But in any event, reporting COVID seems simple. Not. There are all sorts of issues. First, they wanted to know all the positive tests and all the negative tests. Well, in my organization, that's illegal, because a negative test is not a public health emergency. So we had to go through the lawyers. You've heard multiple times about going through the lawyers. We finally got permission to do it. And then we were reporting directly to, I guess, the CDC. And then we had to go through an intermediary that uses a different transmission system. And now we're back, I think, to NHSN, which is another different transmission system. We can do all that, but that's complicated. And it should be simple to report. It's a government agency to another government agency, but it's not. So I think everything that is on here is good. I almost feel like I'm in fantasy land, but I think the spotlight's important, because if 2 or 3 things up there get done, it'll be worth having a meeting. You're not going to do them all, but even 2 or 3 things that are important would be very valuable. And it could be the data. I think it's important to get to the communities, because they're not going to listen to me, probably. Well, some will, but the others won't. So I think that is important. So I will leave it with, I'm modestly optimistic, not as optimistic as some people. But I think we will have more pandemics. We will not be prepared. How can you be? And this cycle will continue. But each time we have a meeting like this after the pandemic, maybe 2 or 3 things will get done. And now I will be quiet.
Well, I mean, I can understand your perspective, but I also want to ask, is this time different? I mean, we've not experienced in this generation or generations a public health crisis like COVID, where the general public has experienced it personally in such a direct and significant way. So if the scientific and public health community can't make the case to policymakers, government officials, et cetera, that we need to be better prepared based on what the experience everybody's gone through, what would it take to do this? I mean, I don't know that scientists are the most politically astute or politically active in terms of driving change, but that's something that definitely needs to evolve if we're going to see a different outcome.
You're exactly right. You would think 1 million people would have an impact. except walk around the country, and they don't remember there's COVID anymore. So I can't guarantee it. But again, the bright lights should make a difference, I hope. But people have very short memories when they don't want to know.
I just wanted to follow up on one or two points that you made, and thank you for those comments. I really appreciate them. One is, you're right, we won't be prepared for the next pandemic, but I think this is an opportunity where we will be better prepared for the next pandemic than
Yes.
we were for this one, because there clearly is more will now and more people working towards this than ever before. Second piece, I just want to disagree with one thing you said about the government and it not being about money. I think it is still about money, and we see that when funding is pulled from one pandemic to fight the next, and the work stops. So even though the money is huge, the money still matters, even in the federal government.
The money does matter. I didn't say it didn't matter. What I'm saying is if they wanted to put it there, they would have. So it's more, I think, political will is kind of a very broad spectrum. So I can't say. And you are right. I think, again, if a few of these things get done, it will have a big effect. And it may be hard to someone may have to help them prioritize it, which won't be me, but they're not going to do all this. But if there's some priorities, it would be a victory.
Absolutely. Thank you for your comments.
So I understand you are talking how do US prepare well for the next pandemic, but we must COVID has taught us very well that what is the value of collaboration. I'm not talking about what US can do for other countries, but even for you cannot just do it for US. I will focus on communication, but you have to see as a global collaboration for that also, because as I said, misinformation, disinformation also mutates, and from US it goes to there and then comes back. We have seen in Europe there are say underserved communities in many countries which are influenced by their say like what is their say from where they have come. Like suppose there is some community in other countries from Poland, so they are more influenced by there. So it matters whatever happens in the world. And US also, you have practically all the communities which may give more importance to what's happening in India or other parts of the world, what they are saying. So it's global collaboration is very, very important. We cannot live in a separate world. So it's not what you are doing for others, but how we can do all together. Second thing is when we talk about non-pharmaceutical intervention, I think we should, we talked about vaccine, we talked about the drugs, and but when it comes to communication, there are long lists which you can do, digital literacy, this and that, all those things, but it has to be, real focus on communication, not a plan, but implementation. Like arranging this type of meeting where everyone comes together. There is no platform where all these people who work on immunization come at one place. Like, we as a pediatrician, we always thought we are the only people interested in immunization, but that's not true. It's a multidisciplinary action which is required. So how do we that happen, and happens at global level, not at the say only one country cannot do enough, and it has to happen everywhere. I think there are many things which is happening here now could have been sorted out if everybody was working together, because what people think there, what's happening definitely affects everybody. And what we have seen that for particularly mRNA vaccine, there was a systematic campaign, or I don't know from where it started and who did that, but target other vaccine, and ultimately from other parts it started targeting mRNA vaccine. So it is not beneficial to everyone, because so there are the bottom line is we have to work in collaboration. We cannot live in isolated world. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes, so as I was reading these action items, I was thinking first, well, what can I do from my position I work for the Pan American Health Organization. What action items can I take and work on that as part of what I do or bring to my colleagues in charge, for example, of strengthening regulatory agencies. But then I was thinking that perhaps we could go a little bit farther and we could try to see who is the person in charge of doing what for each of these action items. At PAHO, we started a series of regional dialogues to reflect on the research ethics challenges as part of COVID-19, and we have published it's called Catalyzing Ethical Research Guidance document that includes the recommendations that resulted from these dialogues. You bring together the regulators, the researchers, the ethics committees, and from different countries. And it's interesting that there's a lot in common with these recommendations. But one thing that we realized in these discussions, when we were all complaining, oh, we need to do this, or this wasn't done, is that very often, like, this was not done, this had to be done and was not done. Very often what we had to ask afterwards, like, hold on a second, whose job was it to do X? And what we've learned is if it's nobody's job, it's not going to happen. So very often, what needs to be done is like, okay, I'm just grabbing some comments randomly. Okay, we need to communicate about the RCTs while they're being conducted in emergency. Okay, someone, as part of the RCT conduction project, there has to be someone with a task of doing this communication at time X. And I think that if we can translate some of these action items into even more actionable items, we will achieve more as part of this effort.
I absolutely agree. If no one is responsible for a specific action, then it's unlikely that that action will be taken, at least on a sustainable basis.